This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 13th chapter. Jesus put before the crowd another parable. The dominion of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in a field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air will come and make nests in its branches. And Jesus told them another parable. The dominion of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. The dominion of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the dominion of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the dominion of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous, and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all of this? They answered yes. And Jesus said to them, Therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the dominion of heaven is like a householder who brings out of the household treasures, what is new and what is old. This is the gospel of the Lord. We've been hearing parables lately, and today we hear 5 parables. And all of those 5 parables we hear today start with the words, the kingdom of heaven. Well, technically I read the word dominion, but kingdom is the same, and I think when we talk about it, kingdom is easier to understand, so I'll use the word kingdom when we talk about it today. So I'll start with the words, the kingdom of heaven is like. And then today at the end of our reading, instead of the disciples saying, explain this to us, like we have heard them say the last 2 weeks, we have Jesus who says, do you understand all of this? And the disciples answer by saying, yes. Today, Jesus is trying to tell the disciples what the kingdom of heaven is like, but he does it using a bunch of parables. And these parables, they all have a bit of a twist to them, which I think is kind of fun because it is Jesus's way of saying that the kingdom of heaven might not be exactly like people think it will be. First, Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven being like a tiny mustard seed growing into a tree where the birds can nest. And while we might think that mustard seeds can teach us that small things can grow into big things, which is true, there's a twist. Mustard seeds were weeds. They were uncontrollable, evasive, and undesirable. So the kingdom of heaven is not only something small that can become something big that gives life, it can also be something persistent that can disturb stuff around us. And once it takes root, it will do its thing, give life. Then Jesus talks about how the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that leavens bread. And here's the twist to that one. The line, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with flour until all of it was leavened, is more accurately translated like this. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and hid in with the flour until it was all leavened. Hid in with the flour. So I picture this woman standing in the kitchen, watching to see what her hidden yeast will do. Will it surprise those who find it when they start baking? I wonder what that woman's intention was. And I think that the kingdom of heaven is like unpredictable yeast that is hidden in the midst of it all by a persistent woman who stands among it all, brushing the flour off her hands on her apron, perhaps with a smile of curiosity on her face. Then Jesus talks about how the kingdom of heaven is like a hidden treasure in a field that someone plows over and then sells everything he has so he can buy that land to get the treasure. Much like how the kingdom of heaven is like a pearl that someone finds and then sells everything they have just so that they can buy that one precious pearl. Now those both seem like a really bad idea. And it doesn't make much sense to sell everything you have to get a field that you know has a treasure in it. And it doesn't make much sense to sell everything to buy one precious pearl. Well, here's the twist. For people who are content, selling everything to have that one thing seems unreasonable. For people who are content, it doesn't make any sense. But to those who know that there is more to life than personal satisfaction and holding on to material possessions and maintaining to status quo, to those people, the kingdom of heaven, as unreasonable as it seems, is true and real and is something that is worth having at any cost. Then Jesus goes on to say that the kingdom of heaven is like catching a bunch of fish, but then you have to separate the fish and all that. And then, of course, there is some weeping and gnashing of teeth in there, which is something we've heard now for the third week in a row. And based on our readings for the past 2 weeks, now would be the time when we would expect the disciples to say something like, "Explain this to us. What does this mean? Explain this to us." Now here's the twist. The disciples say that they get it this time. They get it. Those early disciples understood that in all those parables, the kingdom of heaven is more than we can ever imagine, because it will invade and change and persist in our lives in ways that will bring joy. They get it. They get that the kingdom of heaven brings the joy you would have if you would find a buried treasure and run straight to the bank. The kingdom of heaven gives the kind of joy like you would feel if you find a rare and precious gem so valuable that you can't live without it. The kingdom of heaven is all about the joy you could experience as you brush the flour off your hands and watch all the ingredients come together. The disciples, they understood that the kingdom of heaven is that joy you might encounter when you see that tree that can grow anywhere when you plant a tiny seed. We could say that the kingdom of heaven brings joy in knowing that you are a beloved and forgiven child of God. Joy in remembering that you are always loved and always forgiven. Joy that you can cling to even in your deepest pains, because you have been saved from death and have been given new life. So like those early disciples, we can also say, yes, we get it. We get that the kingdom of heaven is disruptive and life-changing and life-giving. And the kingdom of heaven, with all of its unforeseen possibilities, also offers unforeseen joy. Amen.